Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another one of our Lunch in the Garden programs. My name is David Chinery, and I'm here from Cornell Cooperative Extension of Rensselaer County. So today, the dirt on garden soil, how to buy soil, and how to know your garden soil better. So that's our subject. So we have a good number of people here today, and I was kind of surprised that so many people wanted to hear about soil, but it really is that time of the year where we start to ask, where do I buy good garden soil? Because maybe you're thinking about some gardening projects coming up this season. You're going to need some soil. So that's really the basis of our gardens, right? And it's really the basis of everything that we do. So, where do I buy good garden soil? Maybe a better question is, how do I determine if what is for sale is desirable soil? Because oftentimes you don't have that many choices. But what we're going to do today is talk about how to evaluate what you've got offered to you for sale. And we don't really have information from all the vendors. It would be really wonderful if Cooperative Extension had a library of soils that were for sale in the area. We do have a list of vendors, which I'll show you at the end of the program for ones that are in Rensselaer County. And you can call up your Cooperative Extension office in your county and say, do you have a list of people that sell soil? But we don't really have the ability to test all their soils or evaluate all their soils. So unfortunately, we can't tell you that much. And that's why I do this program, is that I'm going to try to empower you to go out and evaluate the soil. Or maybe you just want to evaluate the soil that you already have in your garden. And we'll talk about that too. It really all applies to the same thing. So I've worked for Cooperative Extension for 36 years, and I've seen some disastrous results of poor soil. So we're going to talk about some of those today. And here's a picture of a sad-looking chlorotic squash. And the plant is really telling us, hey, I don't have the right nutrients. Something is wrong with my soil, right? When you see that poor color, that yellowy green color, and sort of a stunted growth, we know our plant isn't doing well. And of course, we as gardeners know that the plant has to get all its water and its nutrients from the soil. And in that sense, since we depend on plant life and plants depend on the soil, all life on Earth basically depends on soil. So soil is a tremendously important topic, and I really couldn't stress that any more than that. Here's a couple pictures, or a picture of one of my little demonstrations over the years. Two tomato plants potted up in what I would call artificial soil, sort of a potting mix. One of them was given no fertilizer. That's the one on the left that looks sort of a yellowy purple color. And the one on the right was given a complete fertilizer, meaning it had nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in it. And which is the one you'd rather plant in your garden? Well, it's the one on the right. Sometimes I run into people that say, well, I think my garden soil is really good. I don't need to fertilize it. Well, yeah, if your plants are growing really well, maybe you don't need to fertilize it, but a lot of our soils do need some amendments. They need some fertilizer. And especially if we buy a soil that's not really great quality, the nutrients might be lacking. So all of these things go together in this topic of soil. And here's a picture of one of my raised beds that I built years and years ago. And when you're building one of these, you go and you get your lumber or whatever material you're going to put it together with, and you have a lot of fun creating it. And then you say, what am I going to use for the soil? And that sometimes is the hardest part to figure out. Unless you have a pile of nice compost and nice soil on your property, you're going to be looking for something to put in there. So that's going to be one of the trickiest parts of setting up these raised beds. And I know raised beds are one of the most popular things to do in gardening nowadays. 2 weeks ago, we had our Spring Garden Day, and John Martin, who I think is on the call today, was our speaker, master gardener from Albany County, and he did a whole program on raised bed gardening with vegetables, and it's a really popular topic for lots of good reasons. I am very much a dedicated raised bed gardener. But finding that soil to put in there, that can be really one of the challenges. So the genesis of this talk, if you will, came from a newspaper article I wrote years and years ago now, back when we had newspapers. And the gist of it was, what if Moses was a gardener and Moses would come down from above and he would say, here are the 10 commandments of buying soil. if you're going to buy soil from somebody, do these 10 things. And I actually have 11 things today to tell you, but we're going to stretch it a little bit with Moses there. And we're going to discuss these commandments or these pieces of advice from our gardening Moses one by one. So first off, Moses would say, there is no legal or official definition of topsoil. Okay, this means you can be sold anything under the sun. So people call us and they say, well, I want to buy topsoil. Well, unfortunately, there's really no strict definition of that word or what you're going to get for that, what for that request. There are definitions of foods, there are definitions of other items legally, but legally there's no definition of topsoil. So it's really a buyer beware situation. And organic topsoil, that's another one that I kind of scratch my head and say, well, the mineral part of soil is not organic. Organic to me means carbon based, and almost all soils have some carbon in them. So aren't all soils at least somewhat organic? But people like to say organics topsoil. What's that? We don't really know. And you've really got to either educate yourself or trust your supplier. And I think really you have to do both of those, right? If you kind of know what you're looking for and you go out and take a look at that soil before you buy it, that's going to be really empowering to you. And you're going to be able to say, I think this is good stuff, or I think this is not such good stuff. And really, where is topsoil or garden soil coming from? Well, it could be a native soil stripped off the land. Maybe there's a farm field somewhere that they're digging into and taking off the top 6 or 8, maybe 12 inches of soil. Who knows how deep it is? And they're selling you that. Maybe there's a housing development that's being built and they're stripping off that soil and selling you that. So it could be a real soil that's out there and has evolved over eons. Or maybe it's something called a manufactured soil. Maybe they have a pile of sandy material from one source, and maybe they have some clay material from another source, and maybe they've got wood chips they're going to mix in there, maybe some compost. It could be very much a put together sort of soil. Okay. What could be some of these ingredients? Well, who knows? Sand, silts, clays. We're going to talk about those wood chips sometimes you see compost put into these mixes and sold as a soil. So again, it really can be almost anything because there's not a lot of legal framework behind any of this. So number two is to get into your Volkswagen bus like I used to have and go on a trip. All right. Go out and look at this soil because you never should buy soil without taking a good look at it, according to our gardening Moses. So visit the supplier, ask to take a look, ask for a sample. Okay. It's sort of like buying an ice cream cone. I'm going to buy, a $3 ice cream cone. I'm going to try a couple samples before I commit to that. Well, here you're going to be buying something that could be on your property in perpetuity for maybe hundreds of dollars. So why not go out and take a sample of it? Ask to see the pile and get your hands into the pile, which is what we're going to talk about again in this PowerPoint. But that act of actually going out and looking, a lot of us we've been trained now. We can get anything on the internet. We can get anything with a phone call. And it's really tempting to call up and say, hey, deliver me 5 yards of topsoil. And you've never seen this stuff. But maybe that's not such a good idea. And what does this mean when you're buying bagged soil? Okay, sometimes you're going to see soil sold in bags. And this bag has what in it? We don't really know. My father once bought bags labeled topsoil that contained a half clay, half sand mixture so unworkable it required disposal in a landfill. And that's not a joke, that story. And I call that a pig in a poke. You don't really know what you're buying when you've got a product that's in a bag. And when it's something so important as topsoil, you'd really like to see it, right? But I'll never forget he was making a raised bed garden many years ago. And he had this stuff from these bags. It was just horrendous. And it was this clay, sandy mixture. And that's not unlike some of the native soils we have in our area, believe it or not. So it probably was, in some sense, a topsoil, but it was really a horrible kind of a thing to try to put into a raised bed and have some success with it. And again, have you ever sampled a grape at the grocery store? Now, maybe telling you to steal, and I don't want to do that because then we're going to be violating the Ten Commandments for real. But sneak a sample, right? Might there be a hole in the bag that you could poke into? If you're at the garden center and you see all these bags of topsoil, can you see a little bit spilling out? And another thing you could do is ask what local greenhouses and growers and nurseries use. Maybe they have some suggestions. Again, part of this gathering information is just to go out and look and see what's being offered before you commit to anything. And number three, evaluate soil texture, the relative amounts of sand, silt, and clay. Now, soils are made out of a lot of different things. There's an organic component, and there's a mineral component. There's pore spaces, which are really important, and they contain the oxygen and the water. And certainly there's a biological component to soils. But consider this mineral component. The texture of the soil is the relative amount of sand, silt, and clay. So sand particles are very large. Think about the size of a basketball, and relative to that sand particle, a silt particle is much smaller. It's like a golf ball. And a clay particle is tiny compared to that basketball or that golf ball. It's like a kernel of corn. So these are three different mineral or groupings, I guess I'll call them, that make up a soil, the sand, silt, and the clay. And that's what you're really buying, okay, and for the most part. And how those are arranged and the quality of those is really going to determine the characteristics of that soil. Now, a gardening maxim is a good garden soil will have roughly equal amounts of each of these. So ideally, in some rough form, if I was to produce my ideal garden soil, I would want some sand, some silt, and some clay, and some rough ratio about equal. And that is not really always what we get in nature, and that's kind of what we would like to have, okay? And that's called a loam, okay? And you see this word loam batted around a lot. A loam is a soil that has roughly equal parts of sand, silt, and clay. And a loam is often this ideal soil because it has a good range of large and small pore spaces. And those pore spaces are the areas in that soil that are going to contain the moisture. They're going to contain the water, the rainwater or the irrigation water. And they're also going to contain the air spaces. Soils are really made up of maybe 20 percent air, something like that. Air is incredibly important to plant roots, and it's not something we think about. But when you have a lot of very small particles like a clay, you don't tend to have a lot of good air spaces, and then those clays become compacted. So that's where the sand comes in because the sandier soil will have larger spaces. So that loam is kind of ideal in that way. A loamy soil holds a good amount of moisture, but it doesn't stay too wet. It drains well, but it's not too dry. All right, so that loam is this ideal soil because it's got the right amount of air spaces and the right quality of air spaces. And loams tend to hold a good amount of nutrients. And the part of the soil that holds the nutrients really is the clay and also the organic matter. Okay, so organic matter is important, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But the clay is really going to be one of your major um, sources of nutrients. And if you have a soil that's very low in clay, a very maybe sandy soil, they tend to have a low nutrient content. So that's why we will like this kind of rough ratio of sandy soil and clay soil, and those combinations of silt, sand, and clay make this loam. So anyone who is selling soil will tell you it's a loam. Now that's kind of the trick of this. If you go out and look for soil, they're going to say, "Oh, this is loam," right? Well, do they know that? Because again, do we have any proof of that? What do we really know here? So that word gets used a lot. It's like organic in the world of gardening. Organic. That word gets used a lot. Sometimes, maybe inappropriately. Loam is also similar to that. So beware of loam, even though loam is what you want. And here we're going to talk about how you can figure out if it's really a loam. So what's the texture of the soil that's for sale? You're going to do some homework. Okay, so first off, you want to pick up the soil and feel it. If it feels very gritty, it's going to be high in sand. If it feels like you could throw pottery with it, it's going to be high in clay. If you want to know more, you can do this test called the soil texture by feel test. And that's the real homework I'm giving you today, is to learn how to do this little test. Now, when we have our Master Gardener trainees every other fall for their training, we go through this whole process in the classroom, and we bring in different soils, and we do this soil texture by feel exercise as part of a scientific lab. But I'm going to give it to you guys as homework. All right, so what you want to do is go to a search engine like Google or some other search engine and type in the word soil texture by feel, or maybe soil texture by feel flow chart, something like that. And there's a number of these on the internet. One of these is going to come up. It doesn't really matter because they're very, very, very similar. But anybody that's worked through a flow chart can work through this. Okay, so you see at the top of this page, it says start, place soil in palm of hand, add water dropwise, and knead the soil into a smooth and plastic consistency, moist like putty. Does the soil remain in a ball when squeezed? And you're going to answer these questions. It looks a little intimidating, but I think if you print this out and just kind of walk through it, you can get a lot of good information about your soil. So this is a video talking about the soil texture by feel method. Comes from us from Nebraska, and he's going to demonstrate part of what you need to do here.
Okay, we're going to do the texture by feel procedure, and the educators that attended the conferences got a brochure like this. Also in your proceedings book, there's a texture by feel procedure that we're going to step through. And then once we're done with texture by feel, we'll go ahead and estimate the moisture in the soil. And again, you want to take a composite sample of the area you're testing, so you don't take it just from one spot. Okay, to start, we're going to go ahead and take 25 grams of soil in the palm of my hand, and we're going to add water if it's not moist enough. In this case, I've already pre-added water. And the first thing it does is it asks the question, does the soil remain in a ball when it's squeezed in the palm of your hand? And here you see an example. It does maintain a ball like a moist putty. And then the next question we go to, does the soil remain in a ball when squeezed? And the answer is yes, it will. If it doesn't, if it falls apart, it's too dry and I need to add some more moisture. So you want to have your water source close by. And then we want to place the ball. The next step is to place the ball between the thumb and forefinger, and then gently push the soil with the thumb, squeezing it upward into a ribbon like this. And then form a ribbon of uniform thickness and width, and allow the ribbon to emerge and extend over the forefinger, breaking from its own weight. So now you see that it's broke. So it did form a ribbon, so we say yes to that question. The next step is it make a weak ribbon that's 1 inch, less than 1 inch long before breaking. And if you notice, it's right at 1 inch. So I'm going to say yes, that it broke at less than 1 inch. And then the next question is to go on down to excessively wet a small pinch of soil between the palm of your hand. So we want to make it really wet like this. Okay, so we can feel what it feels like. And it says, does the soil feel gritty? Or does the soil feel very smooth? Or is it neither gritty or smooth? So I'm going to have either a sandy loam, a silt loam, or a loam if you follow through. And in this case, it does feel gritty. Okay, so it's going to be a sandy loam texture. If it felt smooth, if I didn't feel that the grittiness in there, then it would be a silt loam. If it felt neither gritty or smooth, then it would be considered a loam. Okay, to summarize what we want to accomplish with the texture is we want to classify the soil into a texture grouping, either a sandy loam, silt loam, loam, sandy clay loam, silty clay loam, sandy clay, silty clay, clay, etc. And the importance of that is that different textures have different available water capacity. For example, a silt loam would have about 2.5 inches of available water capacity versus a fine sand. When you get on the sandy end of the scale, it may have less than 1 inch of water. So that's real important for things like nutrient management. It's also important to know your texture to get an idea of the cation exchange capacity and other important soil properties, and how to properly manage your soil. So that's the primary.
Whoops. Well, I think we got the gist of that. And hopefully everybody saw that part where he was making the ribbon. That's probably the most technical part of this, is to get that ribbon to form over your forefinger with your thumb. It's kind of a fun little exercise, and some people get it easier than others. But basically, you're working down through this chart, and you're going to find out, if you see on the bottom of my screen here, those circles that say sandy loam, loam, silt loam, and all that, you're going to get down to the bottom there. And you know, a clay loam is a good soil. A sandy clay maybe is not such a good soil. You can have variations on loam, right? Sandy loam is okay, silty loam is okay, clay loam is okay. It's when we get really extreme, right? When we really have a heavy clay, or when we have a very much a sand, a really sandy soil, or a sandy clay soil. I find those can be rather difficult. So you don't always have to just get loam. If you can get close to loam, you're still doing pretty good. All right. So that's kind of what we're at with that sort of a thing. And maybe some of you have seen this picture. This gets a little technical. It's called a textural triangle. And this is just showing you the percentages of each type of particle in a soil and what we call it, how we get those names. So you can see a loam is kind of in the middle of that chart there, having the properties of all three. All right. Now I've done this for my own soil at home, and here I am making the ribbon test. This made a weak ribbon, maybe 1 inch long. So again, sort of, I got a similar result as to the gentleman in the video. So I got about 1 inch long ribbon, and then I did my slurry test, or the test where you add a lot of water and you kind of put that in your palm. He didn't do it quite like I do. I put that in my palm, and then I kind of run a finger from my other hand around, and I get equal amounts of smoothness and grittiness. So my soil really is a loamy soil because it is got roughly equal amounts of sand, silt, and clay. But again, you know, you don't always have to get a loam. You can be happy with variations on that. It's just you won't want a really heavy clay or a really heavy sand, because that's where you're going to run into more trouble. Okay, so that's number three. Some of these are a little faster. Number four, we're just going to talk about the color of what you're going to see for sale, okay? Darker soils tend to be better quality. Why would I say that? Well, this is a picture of what we call soil horizons, and the organic level is the O level. That's right at the surface of the soil. A is just the layer of soil right under the surface. And that tends to be where we have a higher amount of organic matter. That's where most of our plant roots are in nature. And then we get into the B layer and the C layer as we go down deeper in the soil. And those layers tend to have fewer nutrients. They tend to be either sandier or more clay, and they just don't tend to be such good garden soils. So you really want that darker layer from the top, and the darkness comes oftentimes from organic matter. So a really dark soil is probably going to have a fair amount of organic matter in it. And also think about compost. What color is compost? It's a very dark brown, right? So that's what we want in our soil. If we were to see a very yellowy soil or a very red soil for sale, we might think, well, that's probably not really great because that's probably a subsoil. That's from down lower in the ground. And that's just not going to be a great soil for our plant roots. Okay? So our native soils tend to have darker material on top, lighter below. And I really love this picture because up at the top there you can see the top of the ground level where we would be standing, and they've cut a slice way down into the soil to show you these different layers as you go down. And some of these layers can be very sandy or very clayey again in our area. I know at my house, interestingly enough, if I dig down about a foot, maybe 14, 15 inches, I get sand. which I would never, naturally think of, but it's a very sandy soil underneath. But I know in our area, a lot of soils, topsoils are on top of clay, and you can run into very heavy clay, blue clay, interesting soil underneath. But again, that doesn't make really good garden soil. And again, what do our soils naturally have? Between 2 and 6% organic matter. In a garden, we might even like to have a little bit higher percentage of organic matter. That's why we add compost, right? So that darker soil just tends to be better for gardening. And I think a lot of gardeners kind of intuitively know that dark soil means good garden soil. And that's kind of a natural instinct maybe among gardeners. There's more subsoil on Earth than there is topsoil. Be careful because they're going to be mining this stuff, and maybe that's going to be part of a manufactured soil. And it may not be so bad if it's combined with compost and other elements, but wouldn't really want to buy a subsoil all by its own. How about smell? Okay, number 5. Does it stink? Now, this is kind of maybe a rude topic, but I put this in here because my neighbors used to be gardeners back in their younger days, and they would routinely buy some sort of mixture. I don't know if I even want to call it soil, but they would buy this mixture every spring, and it really stank. It was horrible stuff. It was full of wood chips. It really smelled not in a good way. And they would, spread that on their lawn or they would do some garden beds with it. And they seemed happy with it. But it was really quite obnoxious in its smell. And I would say I've witnessed some soil that smelled like Secaucus at low tide. And I can say that because I'm from New Jersey, but I'm not from that part of New Jersey. But it leads us to think about what's in that stuff, right? And again, since there's no standards, there are questionable things that don't smell so good out there. Good soil should smell like good earth. Okay, I think that's kind of a very basic one of our commandments. We all know as gardeners, when we go out in the spring and we turn over some soil, it's got that actinomycete smell to it. It's got that spring garden smell to it. That's what we want. We don't really want a very stinky soil that we're going to buy. Even mixes with a good percentage of animal manure should not stink, right? Most of the time when manures are composted, they really lose all of their maybe rude or pungent scents, and they just become maybe even sweet smelling. And compost also should be a good smell as well. Watch out for a large amount of wood chips. Okay, number 6. Why would a soil mix contain a high percent of wood chips? Why does a hot dog, or what does a hot dog have in it? Well, maybe that's not even a fair thing to say anymore, but it's a bulking agent, right? If I'm selling soil and I want to make more of it to sell more, if I have a pile of wood chips, I can mix some in there, right? And make a little bit go a longer way. So, yes, I've seen a lot of soils being sold filled with wood chips or wood debris, I'll even say. Soil microbes are going to break that wood down. Okay, so in the long run, maybe that's not such a bad thing. But initially, those soil microbes are going to need nitrogen to do that. And when they're breaking down all that wood and decomposing that, maybe that nitrogen isn't going to be available for your plants because the nitrogen is what your plants want. So these manufactured soils with a lot of wood in them, I'm a little wary of because the nutrient levels tend to be kind of wacky. And I've seen some instances where this is a material that's been used and the results haven't been so good. This is a big area that was filled in around a housing complex. They changed the grade of the soil. They were putting in lawns, and the contractor mixed up a material that had a lot of wood chips in it, and they sprayed this in there, they shoveled this in there, they leveled it out, and they planted grass seed, and they could not, for the life of them, get grass seed to grow there. And really, the nutrients were being tied up by all this wood in the soil, and it was just a bad set of chemistry going on there. So I would avoid these soils that have a lot of wood chips in them because it's really not going to do my garden plants very much good. Hey, but you're going to say, well, we can grow plants in wood chips, basically, right? Or wood chips mixed with peat moss. This is kind of a technique that sometimes people use with container gardening, and it can work in container gardening, but why? Probably because we're going to be fertilizing that plant a lot. And it's not going to be a long-term plant. It's not going to be a perennial plant. And we can, if we supply enough nutrients, maybe in a liquid form, we can grow that plant. But for the long term, this is not really a good way to go with all that wood material. How about glass, plastic, and other detritus? Now, that's kind of common sense, right? We don't want to buy a soil that has a lot of debris in it. And hate to have to tell you, but I've bought soil that had a lot of debris in it. Stuff that looked like this. We've got broken bricks, we've got bits of plastic, plant labels, rocks, as well as maybe some wood chips in there. So again, if you're going to go on your field trip and look, hopefully you're not going to see any of this stuff. I remember one of the early, when I started my garden almost 30 years ago, one of the early piles of compost I bought, since I didn't have any compost, it was just full of plastic, all sorts of bits of plastic trash. And I spent a lot of time raking that out and getting rid of that. And that's not what you want to buy. Number 8 is a really hard one. Okay, watch out for weeds. Now, again, if you go on your field trip, and look at the pile of soil that you might be buying, you can ask yourself, are there tall weeds near the soil pile? What are those weeds? Are those weeds making seeds? Are those weeds particularly noxious weeds, right? Do you see any rhizomes when you look through the soil? Now, gardeners know a rhizome is a big heavy duty root that can often reproduce entire plants, right? It has the power to spread, it has the power to grow through soil, it has the power to regrow plants that are going to continue to thrive. So if I was looking at a pile of soil for sale and I saw any kind of suspicious looking roots in there or rhizomes, I would probably get in my car and drive somewhere else. And some of the plants that we see that are moved around by soils are things like equisetum, Artemisia vulgaris, and Polygonum cuspidatum. Now, those are fancy words, but here they are. Equisetum arvense, horsetail. This is a plant we often see in new housing developments when they've moved around a lot of soil, maybe brought soil in. And this appears in landscape beds, and there virtually is no way to get rid of this. Even the worst of the herbicides and the most powerful of the herbicides really don't touch it very well. And it spreads and it makes a real nuisance. And I have seen this in a number of landscapes that have it's been introduced through soil or through mulch. Another bad one is Artemisia vulgaris or mugwort, and there's a nice picture of that plant's rhizome. This one often travels in nursery containers or moved topsoil, and you plant something in your landscape, and this comes popping out, and it starts to grow, and it's a really difficult weed to control again. That bottom picture, it looks like there's some landscape plants there that were probably planted, and this Artemisia vulgaris mugwort came in the root systems of those plants. Japanese knotweed, anybody that knows this plant knows it's a nightmare. There's a picture of its giant root. It's really, again, one of the ones that's almost impossible to get rid of. And this can travel in soil if it's dug up, maybe even accidentally. How does this move around in our world? Well, oftentimes, maybe there's some road construction, maybe there's some housing construction. This travels along in soil. So be careful of all those types of weeds. You don't want to get any of those. There's many other smaller weeds that are maybe not so noxious. You could do what's called a bioassay test. Probably nobody has time to do that. That's where you would take a soil sample, take it home, just let it sit out for a week, water it a little bit, see what grows out of it. Most of the weeds you're not going to be able to see, right? So you're just going to have to accept some weeds probably. But if you go to see the pile or you know the source, maybe you can avoid some of the worst ones. All right, and then lastly, or getting towards the end here, ask for a pH test. Now, if you know cooperative extension, we're all about the pH of the soil, which is a measure of the alkalinity or acidity. A pH of 7 is a neutral soil. A pH number higher than that is an alkaline soil. A pH number of lower than that is an acidic soil. We want our pH of our soil to be somewhere between maybe 6.2 to 7.2, something like that, for the most part. Now, ask your supplier, what's the pH of your soil here? Maybe they can tell you that, maybe they can't. All right. pH is very important because it influences the availability of the nutrients to the plants. Um, if we want our plants to really grow well, we want to have a pH in sort of that middle range. We don't want it really alkaline. We don't want it really acidic, unless we're growing blueberries, because they're really one of the exceptions. And this is a fancy chart that kind of just shows at that 7 level, that middle of the picture there, that's where those bands of those nutrients are the widest. And really, it's just a graphic trying to show you that when the soil is in that 6.5 to 7.0 range, let's say, most of the nutrients are mostly available to the plants. When we get out of that range on either side, that's where we run into trouble. And again, most plants grow well 6.2 to 7.0, and I would even go 6.0 to 7.2, maybe up to 7.4. You don't have to be dogmatic about it, but we don't really want to see a pH of 7.8 or 8.2. And unless I'm growing blueberries, I don't really want a pH of, say, 5.5. There are, of course, these plants that do like that low pH. Blueberry, some of the rhododendrons, azaleas, mountain laurel, Japanese andromeda, they want a pH of maybe 5, maybe 5.5, somewhere in that very low range. And again, this gets into a problem when people want to plant blueberries. They want this acidic soil, but oftentimes they don't have it. And one of the lessons there is test your soil before you plant blueberries. If your soil is 7.2, it's not going to be a really great blueberry soil. We can lower the pH with things like sulfur, but it's not an easy task. Uh, so, matching the plant to the soil, that's one of the tenets of good gardening. It's certainly a good thing to keep in mind. And here's a blueberry plant that has chlorosis, meaning the soil pH is just too high. And that blueberry plant isn't going to grow very well. So we used to have these kits we could sell you from Cornell, a little pH kit. We don't have those anymore, but you can bring your soil sample to your cooperative extension office, and they can help you test your pH. And again, if we want to raise our pH, we would use something like calcium, limestone, calcium and/or magnesium. That's the preferred method. Wood ash will do something similar, but we don't really know how much your wood ash is going to work, so we don't tend to recommend that. And lowering pH, we can use some form of sulfur. But again, it's not easy to change pH. So if I was buying soil, it would be a lot easier if I knew the soil was, 6.5, rather than I get it home and I find out it's 7.8 and I really want to change it. So, a pH test beforehand could save you a lot of trouble. And here's the real life example of that. Here's a community garden that was built in Rensselaer County a number of years ago. Lots of raised beds there. Really nice project for this community. And they planted these beds up for a number of years, did not get good growth. The plants were yellow, the plants were stunted, most of the gardens didn't do very well. So finally they called me and we did a pH test, and the pH was 8. So that pH was very high from the beginning. That was soil that was very high in pH when it was purchased and put into those raised beds. You can see from the bars on the bottom there, the nutrient levels aren't bad. They're pretty high, but the pH is just really high, and that's going to throw off your plant growth. So a little precaution there, and a pH test would have saved them a lot of trouble. And my soil at home is about 6.6. My raised beds are a 6.8, probably because I've added a lot of compost over time, and that's raised it just a little bit. Okay, if you want to learn more about soil testing, you can go to our website, which is rensselaer.cce.cornell.edu, or just Google and you can find us. And we have a soil and soil testing page, and all the counties in our area can help you. So if you're in Albany or Schenectady, they'll help you as well with pH testing. And if you're going to ask your supplier for a pH test, why not ask them, hey, do you have a complete nutrient analysis? All right, that's a fancy term. But if you bought a $3 box of cookies, like I have here, you're going to get nutritional levels, right? You're going to get total fat, cholesterol, sodium. It's going to tell you what's in that cookie. Well, if I'm buying $100, hundreds of dollars worth of soil, I would like to know my nutrient analysis. Now, I don't know how many suppliers can tell you that, but we can send a sample off to our lab at UMass. They'll test for things like pH, phosphorus, potassium, the micronutrients, organic level, matter levels, and they'll give you a recommendation for fertilizer and also a lead level in case you're concerned with lead in your soil. So that test costs $30 or $36 if we test it with the organic matter level. And, it would be nice if the supplier could show you that kind of a test. But if you want to do that test, we can help you with that here at Cooperative Extension. And, people say, well, do I really need to test it? Well, the problem is we don't know what the levels are, right? Unless we test it. Here in New York, well, how much phosphorus do we have in our soils? Well, about 20% of our soils are low in phosphorus. About 60% of our soils are high. How much potassium do we have in our soil? About 18% of the soils were low, 64% were high. And these are based on years of soil tests that went to Cornell. They kind of made these generalizations. What's the pH of soils in New York? Well, here we have a whole range, right? We have some soils that are below 5.5, and we have some soils that are way above 7.5. Somewhere in the middle is where most of the soils are, but again, unless we test, we don't really know. Now, you might say, why don't we test for the nitrogen? Well, we don't test for nitrogen because nitrogen's too mobile in the soil, and by the time they test for it and you go to plant your garden, maybe weeks or months later, the levels are going to be different. So you're going to really not get a nitrogen level. So really, we can't tell much unless we test. So again, our website tells you more about how to test soil, and ask your supplier if they do have any kind of a test there. And here's just, again, another example of what we get back from a UMass test. You can see this test came back and the soil had a 5.8 pH. It was low in phosphorus, low in potassium. So yeah, this is going to be a soil that probably needs some amendments to really be a better garden soil. Okay. So lastly, I'll just talk a little bit about organic matter. Now, organic matter, of course, is very, very important to gardens and especially raised beds because we want to have good drainage in our raised bed. We want to really make this very good quality soil to have a good vegetable garden or a good crop of flowers or whatever we're growing in that raised bed. And I'm a huge believer in compost and organic matter. So soil organic matter feeds all those creatures that live in the soil. It supports all that biological component that's in the soil. Most of our soils, I think I said this already, have about 3 to 6% organic matter in them. If we can boost that number up a little bit, that's also a very good thing because mostly plants benefit from that. I like to use compost for this. I have a big compost pile. You can certainly go out and buy compost. Some of the things that we talked about today maybe are important with compost too. I would look at the compost certainly before I bought it, see if it's sweet smelling or doesn't have a foul odor to it. Does it look good? Maybe do a little pH test. Most composts basically tend to come out, in my experience, a little bit above 7.0, maybe 7.2 or 7.4, which is good. And that certainly benefits your soil quite a bit. And of course, we can talk about how much life is in compost or organic matter. A single teaspoon of rich garden soil can hold up to 1 billion bacteria, several yards of fungal filaments, several thousand protozoa, and scores of nematodes. So, yes, improving that organic matter level is really important. Now, we don't have easy ways to test for that necessarily as home gardeners, but here's a little challenge I'll give you. It's called the Soil Your Undies Challenge, and one of our master gardeners discovered this a couple of years ago. It was developed by the USDA, Natural Resources Conservation Service. So there's the website. You can Google that one if you want to have fun with this. Basically, what this is you're going to get a pair of cotton underwear. And it doesn't have to be men's underwear like in my picture here, but it should be cotton underwear of any style, I guess you could say. And you're going to bury that in your soil and you're going to wait maybe a month to 6 weeks. And then you're going to dig it up and see what's left. And you're going to get a relative reading on how much biology you have in your soil, because the microbes in the soil are going to want to digest the cotton in the underwear. So here I had master gardeners that volunteered at a Master Gardener meeting. I gave them all a large size pair of men's underwear, and they're going to take those home, and they buried them, and then they dug them up and they brought them back. So this was in probably the second week of May. And we reported back in August. They had dug them up a little earlier than that, but leave it in it for a few weeks or maybe a month and a half and see what you get. Now you can see that we've got a wide range of how much that underwear has decomposed. The lady on the left end there, hers haven't decomposed very much at all. So we would say that probably there's not so much biological activity in that soil. And maybe she could be improving her garden quality by adding some compost, because the compost might boost up or provide some um, oomph to that population of soil microbes. The second lady over, Betty, hers are almost gone, right? She's got a great soil. She's got a lot of activity in a biological sense in her soil there. And the other three ladies have varying success there. But it's a really kind of fun little challenge that you can do, the Soil Your Undies Challenge. Now, maybe you say, I don't want to do a soil test. Well, if you don't want to do a soil test, and what can we do? Well, if you don't want to soil test, what kind of nutrients can you put in your garden? Well, the old standby is 1.25 pounds of 10-10-10 or 2.5 pounds of 5-10-5 per 100 square feet. That's about all we can do. We can just give you this sort of broad recommendation, but that doesn't really address any of the qualities of your soil. So if you're happy with just, the ballpark idea, I guess you can do that, but it doesn't really tailor anything to your individual site. Again, if you're interested in buying soil, we have a list here at the office. I can email it to you if you want to send me an email. Or if you have any other questions about soil, it's something that I really like talking about. And of course, it's that time of the year where everybody's interested in their garden and their soil.